heart connection, because eventually we're due for this conversation. I've been following you for a while, and I've been looking at the things you've been doing and the stuff that's been happening. So overall, this conversation to me, it's just a teaser. It's a premiere because, oh, man, what's going on here? So I like reading tragedy and hope, but it's the
Can
recurring
I record
bullshit.
this for my own, or do you want this to be
Of course, no
okay?
problem, no
Okay,
problem. Go
so we're
ahead. That
recording
won't
now
be a
for my
problem.
own. Continue.
Okay, so when we're dealing with the idea of tragedy and hope, if you think about it in individual level, people for the most part, they think, well, there's tragedy and then that's all I am. The multi-generational trauma of all these combines, all these political undercurrents, they impact people. So when you think about someone like Victoria Nuland, who has a Eurasian family and who's been displaced from our grandparents were displaced in the Ukraine, and they have all this multi-generational trauma. They rise up to the top of the powerhouse. And in that very same factor, we're dealing with those people who've had not dealt with their trauma. And we could keep saying T, trauma, 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 trauma. But throughout time, epigenetically, none of these massive aspects of our phylogenetic memory is actually being active. And for those like yourself who's been in the middle of it, like an intersection between two different worlds, we're able to transcend and cyclically break through. Now, I've talked about tragedy. Now there's the other part of the hope. The hope. I wanted to ask you in our conversation what happened in 1970s, but in reality, man, is that I understood that 1970s is a critical perspective to really unfold, because what happened in the 1950s and 1960s was exactly what happened today. There was a whole peppering or massaging of the perception of the American mind, with the sexual revolution. We're talking about Alfred Kinsley and many other people. In the 1960s, they co-opted the whole anti-war movement with hippies and other radicalist lifestyle gurus. And I did some more research on that, and that's nothing new under the sun. And the problem lies in that the 1970s, they decided, the politicos, the technocrats, the Benny Brzezinski, Henry Kissinger, you can say all these other people, but they really decided to power civilization with the power of nightmares. Now, the power of nightmares, I've written about this, is literally linked. It's the Freddy Krueger effect, where our unconscious mind is unfolding all this traumatic past. And, demons, all these entities, what they really do is they take your own energy and divide it upon itself. That's literally the agenda of the Anglo-American Empire: divide and conquer. What did England do throughout all her generations? They said they were free market. They said they were about a whole better world and civilization. That's how they sold it to their own people. Their own people were slaves century after century. Now, if you look at the history of Central Europe, it's the very same aspect. 1900s, a recurrence of like New Age spirituality, a recurrence of all these things that we're doing today. They're doing it today, the same pattern, because these concepts, you call them thought forms, thought patterns, bubbles. Well, throughout time, there's a recurring cycle of all these phantoms or bubbles passing through the unconscious mind, and we have this shared dream and the shared reality. And the reason why we think and feel the way we are is because we're activating those parts, and all the other tribes, whether they're black or they're white, they're so enamored by their own materialism, and unfortunately they're dividing us because of that. Okay, so if we think about today, what is really at the crux of the problem? If we think of what the problem is, we imagine it to be some unelected shadow force, anonymous groups creating the conditions of society, and us just being wrecked at the end of it. Well, remember in COVID 2020, there were all the conspiracy theorists, the alternative thinkers, and you spotted it pretty quick. You knew that there was a whole wave of heroes of all these people who thought, well, a person like Nick Fuentes tells me all I need to know. Oh, tranny hour. Oh my God. Oh, aren't you mad? Aren't you upset? Please don't forget to subscribe and like. And that's how we perpetuate this whole cyclical motion of BS. And ultimately, what happens is there's a vortex of all these different people who've been disenfranchised from their family, from their friends, from their locality, and
Right.
become enamored and totally glued into parasocial relationships. Alex Jones becomes their father. David Icke becomes their priest. Nick Fuentes becomes their best friend. And most of these people, if you think about it, they have really weird, distorted sexual proclivities. Nick Fuentes, that individual, is into some weird homosexual, homoerotic relationships with this male prostitute, and there's actual evidence of this. But all of a sudden, he is the sweetheart of Nazi 2.0 or whatever the hell. Well, you said Alex Jones was not the same person that he was. I grew up with Alex Jones. I know exactly what you meant. After such a long time being involved with this, chasing headlines, breaking through the corruption, like breaking free of the matrix and all of this stuff, you tend to realize that that's not necessarily the solution. That in itself, by implication, is the major problem. We are so hooked into somebody else's life, into somebody else's system, into somebody else's thing, cultural identity, that's the beat. That's the beat of Santa Claus. These clockwork elves creating the conditions of culture, and we're just playing to their beats. Really, that is just such a disastrous thing. And the awful part is that it happens again and again and again. And now we're actually experiencing an evolution in human consciousness, and there are very few people who can actually tap into it. But that's the beauty of it. Alex, what do you think about all this stuff?
Yeah, there's a lot there. 70s counterculture, divided races, Nick Fuentes. As far as consciousness, like we literally are going through a major shift in consciousness. And although I've downplayed the collective shift in consciousness from the individual perspective, I'm experiencing it. I'm not the same person that I was last year. That's another story. I fell into my own darkness in last few years by not creating content and letting the dark side bully me into silence. That is something I am still processing. But that is very real. That I drew a lot of negative things to myself by the things that I was talking about, and maybe I was meant to take a break. I did feel that there was great darkness. It's like that intro from Thriller. Darkness falls across the land. When I saw people attacking me, trying to use black magic against me on YouTube in 2019, and people slandering me, I knew that they were being motivated by demons. That it wasn't random, and they were not gang stalking me. They were not working for the government. I was not a TI. They were in fact being focused on me to shut me up. And so what I want to say about that is in 2019, we already saw an increase in people becoming demonically possessed, and even news reports from the mainstream news interviewing exorcists, people that they considered legitimate, not conspiracy theorists, but exorcists. There's more we can talk about that because not all exorcists, I think, are of the light. I try to interview one.
That's
He
right.
only wants to deal with some people and he doesn't want to talk to me. And I think his content is right up my alley. But when 2020 came, I chose to be silent and to stay on the sidelines mostly. And I didn't buy all of the conspiracy theories, although, I didn't enjoy the lockdowns. But I had already faced my own isolation. I didn't see everybody as victims. I saw the coronavirus period as a time in reality in which the government gave a lot of people a lot of free money. Even though they said they were experiencing the lockdowns, tons of people migrated to Colorado, driving the cost of land double, triple what it is now, forcing some people to go back to the grid that can't afford the new taxes. And so a lot of people ended up in a better situation after COVID-19. Not everybody. Now, a lot of people also embraced the dark side energy because they were oppressed by the system, and they snapped back and said, including one guy who I interviewed or talked to like we're talking, he ended up embracing the dark side, saying that everybody that took the vax should die. And so he's sitting there on BitChute with his audience basically applauding him, saying that they're waiting for everybody that took the vax to die, saying that everybody that took the vax is shedding. And then the other theory was that 5G is causing the coronavirus. So instead of people having rational vaccine skepticism, which of course we're not allowed to talk about out in the open on YouTube, but instead of them just being rational about it, people went out of their way with really bizarre theories. And if some people didn't go along with those theories, like one woman that was on my Patreon, when I said that I didn't agree that it was caused by 5G, that was the moment that the only female listener to my Patreon bailed. And that felt like a stab to the heart. But I knew in my heart that she was not fully of the light, because if she was, she would not just believe everything that's coming out from David Icke. So there's a reason why I didn't watch Plandemic, the movie. There's a reason why I didn't get on board, because I knew that it was kind of designed to keep us in this left-right divide. And I'm thinking to myself, there should be healthy vaccine skepticism, but it shouldn't be a right versus the left. There is no reason why people on the left should be just blindly being told what they're being told about the coronavirus, viewing everybody that views it with skepticism as a conspiracy theorist Trump supporter. So there was definitely algorithmic manipulation to keep us in this left-right divide. Now, as far as my mother, I do love my mother, but it did hurt my feelings when she visited me and said that, well, Alex Jones did predict the vaccine situation. And when I told her about the racism of Alex Jones, she did not reply. And so, and she may be listening to this. And so, I hope that she does see the light with regards to Alex Jones and the dark side of the conspiracy movement. But Alex Jones is not the only person to predict the health event. And there's actually, as I was told, many astrologers that did predict that there would be a health event also. So Alex Jones was positioned, we'll get to Nick Fuentes next, to be the hero in this. And so a lot of people that weren't previously listening to Alex Jones were now sitting at home listening to Alex Jones. And he was using 300 symbolism from the movie 300 to promote the fear of the Islamic invasion, the 2020 version, in which he kept showing clips from the movie 300, and that triggers a lot of people that have this ancestral memory of the Crusades, the Muslims versus Christians. And so it will bring them back into that mentality, that 13th century mentality or the 10th century mentality. And I recorded with a camera. I'm going to see if I still have a copy of it. The type of commercials and PSAs that Alex Jones was putting out were totally satanic and totally, totally dark. Not something that you would expect from a 9/11 truther. And he does not really talk about 9/11 like he used to. Now, Nick Fuentes was riding around with Alex Jones apparently at the Stop the Steal protests and stop the lockdowns. And Nick Fuentes has been accused of covering up for pedophiles, according to and I was following that controversy briefly on YouTube. Now, as for the 1970s, there was a monster solar flare in 1973, and so it seemed like there was a big rise in counterculture around that time period. Also the late 60s. But the solar flares aren't totally benign. That which gives us life also gives life, I suspect, to the paranormal influence and witchcraft energies. And so in the 70s, we saw a rise in witchcraft because of the dark side of Christianity. Although I'm somewhat of a Christian, I do believe in Jesus, but there's a dark side of Christianity that believes in controlling women, that believes in calling children without a father, bastard children. There are some interpretations of Christianity that are absolutely racist, that play up white savior complex. And unfortunately, that's what leads to some people joining New Age cults, UFO cults, witchcraft, right? They know they've been lied to by the church and judged by the church. So they end up many times in these counterculture movements that are still being controlled by these dark forces. Now, in the last few hundred years, through Western imperialism and the British, we've seen this classification of the races. And I have not deeply studied this, but they have classified all these different races. We've seen eugenics, which predates Nazism. And so Nazism is very much influenced by genetics, and it very much influences people today that will look at people by the shape of their nose. I experience it. The shape of their jaw, the shape of their skull, without realizing that they're engaging in eugenics ideology. And me as an individual, when I look at, because I'm in an area that has a lot of whites, and they tend to segregate racially at the churches, but it has a massive Latino population and a massive East Indian population, Arabic population, and a massive black population. And so when I look at, for example, some groups playing sports at the park, I'm not sure if I'm looking at East Indians or Hispanics or Middle Eastern people, because when I look at those groups, I can't necessarily tell them apart. And sometimes I wonder if we all have a similar ancestor, people of Hispanic
That's where I was
heritage.
going with that,
Yeah.
Alex. Sorry to interrupt, but that's
Yeah.
where I was going with that. That's why I was mentioning to you in the combo show about the Asiatic tribes and Latino tribes and other types of Mediterranean and Middle Eastern people who have this physiognomy and almost like a shared spirituality that in some ways mix and match in different reverse ways. I want to also kind of exemplify what you've talked about. The moment that Alex Jones had changed for me was literally the moment when he had Donald Trump in an interview. Literally, this was the most blockbuster interview that was, in my opinion, was like, oh my God, this is going to something. But from all the research that I've done in Stop the Steal and Donald Trump's presidency and Alex Jones' involvement in all that, Alex Jones throughout the show kept saying that he was connected to military intelligence. He kept saying that again and again and again, that he knew these things through military intelligence or through other channels that were connected to the military intelligence. I don't know if you know this individual, but he brought up this deep state agent called Steve Pashenik. Now, Steve Pashenik, man, that is really where we start focusing overall how the co-opting of the conspiracy truther movement started, because Steve Pashenik started saying, I, for one, don't agree with the Constitution. It's outdated. We need to get rid of it. Literally his words. And that's when the new wave of Alex Jones and InfoWarrior supporters started getting in, because it was not the same. Now, there's many people that you might already know, like Aaron Dykes, Melissa Melton, and all these other people. But really, when things really started also getting off the rails, is when a story was breaking out of the whole matrix of the InfoWars news network, and that was the idea of Dynology, this corporation that actually automates fake news and finds ways to demoralize and centralize command or psychically drive people towards certain agendas. And this is literally a military document called Interactive Internet Activities. Interactive Internet Activities is literally how it sounds. Now, during this whole like Stop the Steal, January the 6th, and Steve Pashenik was frequently on the Alex Jones show. And the problem with that is because after the whole January the 6th fiasco, everyone said, well, we couldn't have predicted this. No way this could have happened. And if you actually go back to the shows, Alex Jones, Steve Pashenik, Owen Schroyer, and others were drumming the beat. They were beating the drums over it. We got to go over do this and do that. They were all working a counter-revolution, and even Steve Pashenik had said, oh, yeah, we're going to stop the steal because we have these QR codes in the ballots, and we'll be able to stop it. It was all a way to stand down the zeitgeist of people who had enough. And then the whole COVID-22 agenda and everything, all of that was also a way for us to be totally conditioned by fear, because all of the major alternative channels were literally saying that we're all going to die, that we're all going to be done by the vaccine, and no one really actually took a balanced effort to debunk these things. And I was in that moment telling people, guys, seriously, if they really believe that, tell them to sell their property, tell them to sell everything, and go and just go off. But they won't do that because they don't actually believe that, and a new paradigm, and they're putting their players in line to do that. That's the currency. That's what they do. Anyways, Alex, I just wanted to exemplify those things.
Yeah, I have a piece of paper. I'm taking notes. I'm totally able to keep up with your speed, and you're able to keep up with me from what it sounds. And so I have a lot of things to respond to that. So as far as me questioning Alex Jones and turning away from the earlier part of my life, in which there was a fair amount of borderline worship, to be frank. Although when I first heard him in
Yes.
2, I thought it could be Hitler. That was my intuition telling me that he was dark, but I ignored that, and I went with a pro Alex Jones worldview, and he was my hero. Now, when I interviewed him for the second time in 2007 over the phone, first time was in person, second time was over the phone. At the end of the interview, I asked him, what did he think about Israel? And then he got really mad at me, and I've been contemplating lately if I should bring that interview back and show people that clip. I did follow my intuition and removed all of my interviews with him, David Icke and others, Joel Skousen, others, because I didn't want fans of theirs to think that, and haters of theirs to think that I was united with them. I didn't want people to associate me with them because I'm not with them. As for the person that you're mentioning, I saw him in 2020 on Roku. Talk about, he basically from a pro QAnon perspective, that there was going to be a military coup and act like it's a good thing. So here I am witnessing Alex Jones with the person that you're talking about, Steve Pashenik, basically talking about a QAnon takeover or a coup, and normalizing that, totally getting people on board this idea of almost a Hitlerian type of takeover just because they say that the election was rigged. Now, I'm not pro-Biden. I don't like Biden. What Biden did to Afghanistan, the way he pulled out was wrong. But I don't see either Trump and Biden like a lot of people don't, as heroes or good guys. It's like a false choice. And if someone doesn't realize that it's a false choice, they're not paying attention and they're not very intelligent. And they're easily swayed by mind control. Now I was watching him on Roku because at that time I was guided in spirit to get off YouTube, to get off Facebook for a time till I returned and just watch movies, just relax, just watch Roku, which is basically a way you can watch internet streaming TV without being on a laptop. You just hook it up to your TV and bam, you're watching Netflix. And so I noticed the Alex Jones channel was on Roku. So supposedly Alex Jones was banned on YouTube. Supposedly Alex Jones was being held back by the man, but yet he was being promoted or shown. I can look him up on Roku. And then I also studied a lot of the content on Roku. Is very pro-Trump leaning with a lot of celebrities with movies from Andrew Dice Clay to others that said positive things about Trump, whereas people that were known to be critical of Donald Trump, their content was not so easily displayed. There were some documentaries critical of Donald Trump, but very few, mostly from the Democrat perspective. There was a lot of conspiracy, still is a lot of conspiracy content on Tubi, on Roku, showing that they're totally fine with conspiracy theory as long as it fits into the narrative. So that would be content from David Wilcox, that would be content from other QAnon influencers, and content that leans in the direction of the disclosure, the idea that the government is going to tell us the truth
Yep.
about the aliens, and a ton of Hitler content. Not all of the Hitler content being critical of Hitler, many of it being neutral. So we see the rise in content of documentaries called Hitler's Career and many others, and many other documentaries about Hitler that almost give people ideas, to where they show glimpses of his occult ideology, glimpses of his occult belief system, but not really a spiritual perspective on what's really going on here. And so I noticed a lot of suspicious things with Roku. So Alex Jones's ex-wife, by the way, she wants to act like she's a victim, and in some ways she has
Yep.
been victimized. But according to Jack Blood, who used to work for Alex Jones, he received phone calls from Alex Jones's wife saying, "You're not pushing this product hard enough. You're not doing this hard
Yep.
enough." And so there's a lot of ex-Alex Jones employees who want to act like they're victims, including one individual who's Jewish. His name slips me at the moment, who complained about anti-Jewish racism when Alex said, "Here's our Jewish friend who's in the office," when he was interviewing David Duke, which is basically Alex Jones interviewing a neo-Nazi, a
Yep.
founder of or a leader of a KKK group, I believe. And so he acted like he was
Yep.
debating with this KKK figure, when anyone with any intelligence realizes that he's platforming this individual, just like he's platforming Kanye West and Nick Fuentes. He's basically putting their name out there so his followers, his readers, his viewers can go and follow these individuals. When I tried to
Right.
contact
Yes.
this ex Alex Jones employee and talk to him about the anti-Islamic content that he helped create, he blocked me and he wouldn't talk to me. He only wanted to complain to the media, the mainstream media, about the anti-Jewish sentiment from Alex Jones, but not take accountability for his own actions. So Melissa and Aaron Dykes, to the best of my knowledge, are the only former Alex Jones employees that I'm aware of that have been a part of the Real Truth movement. They don't waste time bashing Alex Jones. They had to sign a non-disclosure agreement, just like every former Alex
Yep.
Jones employee. So they can't tell the full truth as to what they experienced, but they seem to be people that are on the right path. There is another name, and I would have to look it up on the internet to find out his name. But there's one Alex Jones employee, former employee, that did talk about how he felt guilty, he felt bad about playing a role in the targeting of Islamic communities. And so most people out there have no knowledge of what Alex Jones did if they weren't watching during that time period, of how he targeted certain communities in the U.S. and saying that they were going to promote Sharia law. That would include one mosque, I believe, in Garland, Texas, one mosque, I believe, in Michigan, and places on the East Coast, to where followers of Alex Jones showed up with guns and made threats to these individuals. So thank God none of these individuals were killed. I don't know if that was God protecting these mosques, but fortunately there was no violence. But the rhetoric from Alex Jones towards these groups could have led to violence, And I'm not convinced that we are out of the woods yet. I don't watch Alex Jones now, even if I'm critical of Alex Jones. I don't make anti-Alex Jones content because he and Donald Trump said anybody that criticizes me is of the deep state. And there are people so brainwashed by Alex Jones that they will believe that. But if anybody listening to my voice now, because I'm going to share this with my own people on Substack, if anybody starts to see Alex Jones deliberately targeting communities again, I want you to tell me, because I'm not going to be silent about it. I'm not going to be silent about it if Alex Jones is going to go on that route, because as far as I'm concerned, he is my mortal enemy, and I'm trying to speak peacefully. But this man who inspired me so much to get involved in the truth movement, that I viewed at one point in my life as a brother, as a straight up brother from a former incarnation in a galaxy far, far away. I thought we were united. I thought we were on the same side, and I know in my heart that he is serving Satan. And so the final thing that I'll say and pause is that, yeah, China may have been involved in some draconian lockdowns, and they may do some bad stuff to the US in the future. But just because Trump says China, 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 and blames China for the coronavirus, I don't know that that's the truth. And I know that with China being the focus on what happened, there's been a rise in Chinese hate crimes. Also, people of Japanese heritage have been harmed and beat up, including a diplomat in downtown Portland, Oregon, including Korean Americans, including Vietnamese Americans. And so, despite the fact that I'm warning about China, there's a big difference between what the Chinese government is doing and the lives of Asian Americans, many of which in this country are peaceful and are not doing anything nefarious. And so I'm concerned about the coronavirus coverage contributing to the rise in violence towards Asian Americans, and I'm concerned about their plight in the event of China attacking the U.S.
So when you take a deep dive to the social connections, it's not the third degree, but there is a reason why social graphing is so important, because it's all a circuit. Alex, you and me, we've been involved in this alternative media for years, independently of each other. We've been working resounding hours of putting, okay, look, I got this big picture, I got this critical thing, there's something that they didn't consider, maybe they just were too busy. But then the alternative perspective gets totally diffused, and people will only get the surface of it because they have an angry person on camera with their 15 minutes of hate speech to make themselves feel whole again. It's this feeling of self-righteousness. But going back to this idea or the trajectory of the momentum and the zeitgeist of the awakening, it seems like we wake up for a certain amount of time and we go back to sleep
Yes.
because we're going too far into the boundaries of our identity. Now, I really like what you said, that personally, I saw Alex Jones as this formidable person, this icon. Since I did not have a proper father figure, well, I supplanted this parasocial
Yes.
relationship as the father archetype, and they know that they're doing that because they have psychological dossiers on a lot of us, and in general they understand the conceptual transformation of society. Now, when we speak about China and this rhetoric of anti-Chinese sentiment, well, who gave them the weapons? Who gave them the technology? Who gave them the secrets? They signed on. The reason China is as powerful as a client state in the new multipolar world order, well, they're doing a great job over there. They're doing a great job with the social management, and they literally say, the technocrats of China say, we're better than the United States at this particular model of organization. Well, the reason we can blame the Chinese people, but we can't blame the enemy within this wall, is because we identify with these power holders and we truly believe that they're the ones that are setting the beat and are helping us preserve our culture and identity, when in fact it's the consumption of our culture and identity that really powers up the whole system. Alex, what happens to all the people that come from third worlds, that come into this country, they have one or two generations? You know what happens? They lose their culture, they lose their family, and they literally say, what's the point of coming to this country if all you're doing is work, your children don't respect you, you don't even have a life, and you're just working for the man? What's the freaking point? Well, the freaking point is that we're all the energy cells that are powering up this whole matrix. But the people who actually semi wake up are really the ones that I feel the most for, because they're in between these two different ideas, the idea of being free and the idea of comfortable slavery. They love the comfortable slavery of cultural identity because it gives them a script. You know, people love a script because they are so uncertain and so anxious with their own being that they need an authority, an external third party to tell them, okay, now this are the rules, you guys play for it. And this external authority figure always picks the winners and the losers, and we're participating in it just by being a fucking audience member. I don't know if I'm going a little bit too much with the curse words, but it does make me upset thinking about my journey, my trajectory, and how much I sacrificed and invested in this freedom movement when in fact the very same people that are in my movement don't have my back. What does that say about us, Alex? What does that say about us?
Well, I got a lot to say, but as far as curse words, somebody is allegedly going to help me get back on cable access TV. And I took my episode "Conspiracy Theories Exposed," where I exposed the right-wing conspiracy theories that are taking us around. And I spent hours and hours just taking out my swear words. But since it's going to be on our Substack and social media, I think that we're fine. But I think that it's amazing that in this day and age that people are so caught up in language, but yet they're so okay with other aspects of propaganda, genocide, death, and destruction, but they're going to be offended by a few swear words. So let me talk about the Americult psychosis that happens with a lot of immigrants. There's a lot of immigrants that come into the idea of worshiping the American dollar, of worshiping aspects of the system because they come from somewhere else where there's hardship, and they fail to understand that there's some aspects of their own culture that they should retain. Back in 2009, I went to a town hall forum in Yelm, Washington, where they were promoting the swine flu vaccine. And I was there with Richard from survivalcenter.com, who were no longer friends, but we were friends at that time. And he wanted me, with my bright mind and my quick thinking, to counter a lot of their pro vaccine talking points. And the Chinese woman there was basically talking bad about her own ancestry and her own mother, saying, yeah, I heard that there's alternatives, but these are like the old ways. Like basically saying, paraphrasing, that the ways of her ancestors were naive ways, but the ways of the vaccine and modern medicine, yeah, that's the way to go. And so, she was just absolutely brainwashed. And like I said, with my father's family, they'll sit there and they'll cry about what happened to Afghanistan and act like it's Joe Biden's fault without like doing their own deep dive and being honest with themselves that the powers that be in the Western world had it in for Afghanistan since day one. They've been massacring people since day one, and some of those individuals, as translators, worked along these bloodthirsty maniacs that basically have been committing genocide, but they won't call it out as genocide, and they will still see me as a conspiracy theorist. So, but because they love money, because they love a salary of $200,000 a year, or however much they made as translators, they will see the Americult as something that is good. So they will drink their alcohol, watch their pornography, eat their fast food. And my father will put me down for trying to learn martial arts, not MMA, but martial arts at the age of 16 as I'm hitting the bag. Say anybody can be Rambo. It takes a real man to get an education, while he will go and work with U.S. troops who do MMA in the Afghani desert, who train to fight the Afghan enemy in their eyes. They get a chance to go to Afghanistan, while his son doesn't get a chance to visit his father's homeland, which is sick enough. And he will sit there and watch football while these black and white football players put steroids into their arms so they can be big and bad. And he's an absolute hypocrite. So I can look at people like this, like my father, and see that hypocrisy as they came from foreign lands, yet they literally work for the people that destroyed their country. Kissinger in that famous meeting in China and helped bring China up to where it is today, along with many others. It's amazing how people will see Kissinger as this mastermind of the modern New World Order structure. Yet Kissinger recently said, I think they made a big mistake bringing all these migrants in to Europe, even though there's some truth in that. But you're not going to see, because of the hypocrisy, people criticize Kissinger. They're going to be hypocrites, and they're not going to be concerned with that. They're just going to ignore that little headline. So if they're so concerned with Kissinger bringing us deception upon deception, then maybe they should question why Kissinger is saying that. And the next thing that I'll mention is we've got a guy named Alex Stein, who came on the scene in 2021 doing anti-vaccine raps at city council, I think in Texas. And he gained the
Hmm.
popularity of people around the world by being super funny and super talented and being super quick on his feet. And Alex Stein said, don't blame all Muslims. And 9/11 was an inside job. But as he became more popular with the right and started hanging out with Alex Jones and started being
Hmm.
part of Glenn Beck's The Blaze TV, he then took on an anti-Islamic, anti-Muslim sentiment. And there's many, many episodes that I've seen from him in which he has dehumanized these people. So it's amazing how people can wake up, like you say, but once they're wrong around the wrong company and they're being given a salary, they know to edit themselves, and they will, even though they think they're a part of the truth movement, they will edit out those aspects of themselves that were human, that were conscious, that were loving, that were different than the far right extremists, and they will come the far right extremists in order to make a buck. So there are these periods in which people do wake up. Like I said, after 9/11, a lot of people woke up to the corruption when it was George W. Bush. It's a combination of where we were in the solar cycle combined with George Bush being in office. And then when the solar cycle is no longer intense and Barack Obama comes in, who acts like he's going to end the wars, people then fall into line. The left followed into line. And then you had a lot of people fall into line with Donald Trump. Um,
Hmm.
and that was during a solar minimum period. And as I said on the Coast to Coast radio show, and fortunately they quoted me correctly on their synopsis of the show, that when there is a solar minimum and the sun is less active, people tend to go to sleep and go along with draconian measures when they normally would not go along with it. And the 2020 period, it was a period in which the sun was starting to wake up, but the sun is much more active now and in 2022 than it was in 2020. And so a lot of people did go along with the lockdown period. However, not everybody did. It also, the other thing that I talked about is it seems like society enabled the criminal elements through the psychosis of the health event and everybody being paranoid with the mask and everything, and everybody might be a carrier of this. Law enforcement really stood down in a lot of ways in society, and it was really, in a lot of ways, I saw it firsthand. It was criminals gone wild. It was drug addicts gone wild. And so, even though elements of society were not giving social services and receiving food stamps or receiving help because offices were closed, um, we saw it with
Hmm.
Facebook and YouTube. A lot of people doing the street racing and spinning their tires back and forth. It was just ridiculous. And so I would say that we're definitely being prepped for future versions of this. And there might be places in the US that might not be very comfortable to live in, but there might be places in the US in which there might not be mandatory vaccines in the future, and other places in the US in which they do force people to take the vaccines. I'm going to just say this. The people out there that hope that the people will die of the vaccines are totally satanic. My mother had to take the vaccine, and she had an issue with her friend saying, "Oh, you're going to die, you're going to die." And even if somebody has to take it, and there's many of us that know people that had to take it or are pressured to take it. And the fact of the matter is, there's plenty of them. I'm not pro vax, but there's plenty of them who are not dead. And so for people to act like everybody that's going to take the vaccine is going to die, they're working against the vaccine skepticism movement by getting so extreme with their predictions, and in some cases
Yep.
hoping that people are going to die. And there's a lot of people that were promoting the people dying suddenly content. And I'm not here to criticize everybody that got behind it. I don't know if you push that too. I'm just saying that intuitively, I didn't believe that when I was seeing it, and I just viewed that as part of the deception. This whole content that's out there of the. Let me say this: it is said in the Bible that in the last days, people's hearts will fail them, and so there might be other reasons also, including 5G and other unknown technologies that might be contributing to some of these heart attacks. Also, the solar cycle does contribute to cardiac arrest. And so I did see a rise in recent days of people saying that they had heart attacks, and seeing someone that I know online that I talked to say that they had a heart event. And so even if people think that they're not affected by the solar cycles, for those that do fall into obesity and don't exercise and don't work out and eat bad food, those are going to be the periods in which their hearts may face complications.
You know how you were saying how you find it surprising that there's people who believe, and we're on the same page, by the way, about the immediacy of dying and being just a
Mm-hmm.
completely bunk. It's inspiring the nightmares. Yeah, we're on the same heart-to-heart connection here. But I wanted to go dial back into the conversation because there's a bigger picture in all of this, and I want to contextualize it with you, where not even Henry Kissinger or Zbigniew Brzezinski, and these are technocrats, there's a very big distinction between ownership and managers. Owners have been in this possession of the world for generations, centuries, and families, and all the breeding and everything that goes back to the archons and all these different demonic blood alliances. But in general, when we consider the managers of this technocratic regime, they themselves don't know what the hell all the machines and the systems are doing. They're only performing a task, and they're a known quantity in this whole program. So it's like they're not really a variable. They're a control method, a control mechanism, and these unenlightened fools. I call Henry Kissinger Satan's little dumpling because this unenlightened fool has participated and precipitated a lot of conflict in the Middle East and all around the world, but he himself doesn't fully know the whole agenda. And then originally in our conversation in the Combo Show, you had talked about, and you expressed a thought and opinion that I also share, which those who are in the shadows, if we can call them entities, agencies, whatever, we just know that this is dark forces are afoot. They are in a timeline that is beyond human. And
Mm-hmm.
their timeline is so outward reaching, we're making sense in the microcosm. They're in the macro scale of time. And the one thing, okay, going back to the heart to heart connection and the transcendental essence of being, well, you said in the end times in the Bible it says people's heart will fail them. Well, think about how it fails us on a daily basis where we don't even follow our own instincts, our own heart. Well, in general, from what I am seeing, is that the paradigm is not necessarily human, obviously, but the paradigm that we're being shifted is we're still needed. There's a necessity towards our existence because we're the ones creating the holographic reality. And in orders for these dark forces to really manifest the world and the reality that they want to see in the overall picture, well, they need the managers, they need the pawns, they need all this artificial terrarium to create the conditions in order for them to supply new food, supply new adventures, new ideas. But overall, Alex, I think we're speaking the same thing. We're just coming from two different perspectives. And genuinely speaking, those who are failing are the ones who are just caught up in their own mind maze and they don't touch to their heart and they don't understand that it's about the compassion. It's about using faith and I say this almost in a self-righteous way, using faith as a weapon because you're not going to have all the answers. You're not going to have all the money. You're not going to have all the tools at your disposal. But the very fact that you're afraid and unwilling to act in this matrix with your heart in your center should tell you exactly how dominated and how enslaved as a person you are. Because it's not about George Soros, it's not about Alex Jones, it's not about this, that, or the other. It's about the present moment. This very existence is all, its totality. And when we plug into that, that is when we really start divorcing ourselves from this whole spectacle. The whole objective of this whole DMT carnival is to keep us plugged in for us to be the next clockwork elves and institute the tyranny ourselves. And no freaking way am I going to do that. One thing I never ever do is not listen to my intuition. I tune into my heart because that's the one thing that leads me. Either way, even if I'm wrong or mistaken, that's the beauty of it. There's wealth and there's a bounty to it. So now, really, what I'm thinking, the next step for anyone, and especially, Alex, I think you should consider this. The next step is for us to forsake these things, not because we didn't do the best job, not because it doesn't fit us, but forsake them because they're not of our creation. forsake them because they're not to our benefit, forsake them because they no longer are the benevolent people that we imagine them to be. There's something about the idea of doing nothing. There's a reason why doing nothing is powerful. When we are involved in this carnival, we're gonna want to believe that doing something is the solution. What do you think, Alex?
Yeah, I've written a lot of notes here, so I'll just go down the line. So, doing nothing versus doing something. It was necessary for my mental health, my spiritual health, and my physical health for me to stop uploading in 2019 and 2020. And in a future upload, I'm doing a summary of the book, Online Addiction for Dummies. And then I'm giving a
Hmm.
spiritual take on that book, and I'm just going through it and reading it random. But there's a term called broadcast intoxication. And it's the idea of
Hmm.
basically getting high off the idea of doing uploads after uploads and then getting that dopamine hit from the likes and the comments that follow. And when you become
Hmm.
addicted to that, like a drug, and you step back from that, there is like a moment of clarity that occurs. And then the people that are also listening to one's content, they may not realize or admit consciously that they are addicts to listening to someone, even if they like to bully that person or treat that person with racism, because not everybody who's racist believes that someone is intellectually inferior who they're stalking and slandering. The people that were racist towards me did not find me intellectually inferior whatsoever. They absolutely wanted to feed on my content and wanted to attack me and berate me for having the ideas that I had. So they did not think that I was inferior intellectually. They knew that I had more knowledge than them, and they were attacking me because they believed it was their role as servants of Adolf Hitler and Russia and the dark arts. They believed that it was their role and job to harm me, whether they were conscious of that or not. Intuition versus the heart. You know, there's a lot of Sufis and spiritual mystics that talk about being in the heart, and the New Age movement is very much about being in the headspace. And the thing is, like, we can be very manipulated, and when we think that we're intuitive, when we think that we're getting these psychic downloads, when in fact we can be easily programmed. And it seems that we were given a biology, whether we were created by the true God or the fallen gods. Don't really know on that, but we certainly have the apparatus within us as human beings that can be tampered with and manipulated through these perceived psychic senses. And we see that through the psychic realms and the channelers, nobody really accurately predicting 9/11 that I'm aware of, and predicting the rise in China, for example, or the rise in hate crimes or other things. They have predicted things that haven't come to fruition and have promoted the collective shift in consciousness. Going then to that, we are in these times in which we do have, like I said earlier, with the solar flares and the eclipses, the potential at the individual level to shift forward beyond our former selves. But I don't subscribe to the idea of the ascension per se, the idea that
Hmm.
we're all ascending collectively or that we're going to float up to the spacecrafts. If I was to subscribe to that, it would be if there were more people that showed concern for people that were disenfranchised, concern for the homeless, concern for the victims of war, concern for the plight of women that are in the pornography industry and the adult industry. They would not be
Yes.
saying that we are collectively shifting and have worked out our issues when in fact the earth is still a toilet. There's still a lot of crap floating around, and they're just choosing to ignore that and just say, just focus on the positive. So while we do have the potential to raise ourselves consciously, I don't believe that the collective is. And if the collective was shifting collectively, things would look a lot more different. The other thing is, so the world leaders, we're constantly hearing about George Soros, which just bores me to tears. That some people are of such a low intellect that they truly believe that George Soros by himself is behind this, or that the Jews are behind all the world's problems. When there's plenty of innocent Jews that are not Zionists, that are not trying to mess with anybody's lives. They're just trying to live their own lives, and they happen to identify with this box of Jewishness. And on that note, some people say that the Palestinians are also Jews. On that note, some people say that the Pashtuns in Afghanistan may also be part of the lost 10 tribes, or is it 12 tribes, the lost tribes of Israel. And so even within this box of what is a Jew, there's actually a much deeper truth to that than we are told. And so a lot of these world leaders, yeah, they do seem to be under mind control. They don't seem to be the masterminds. They don't seem to know their role in this. I would assume that Donald Trump, though, does know his role in this. But he could be possessed as well to see themselves as the quote return of Christ. He does speak of himself in a language that he is the return of the king. And so this language of the king returning does play into this belief that Jesus is returning. And so people that are waiting for Jesus to return, they will unconsciously support Trump, thinking that he represents Jesus Christ. And he
That's
will
right.
talk about the seventh seal being broken. And I don't follow everything that he says, but I will pick up on things that other people report that he posted at True Social. So he does use deliberate language that does play into this idea of the return of Christ. And as for immigrants that have joined this Americult, to go back to that, there is something fundamentally wrong with many of these immigrants, including my father's family, living in what I would consider to be the most dangerous places in North America, as opposed to living like their ancestors in harmony with the earth. It is out of balance, totally out of balance with nature, for these off-grid areas to be dominated by whites, and for those whites in those off-grid areas to be dominated with Trump worship and white supremacy. When Donald Trump himself has never supported off-gridders, you might know that I have my own history of shining the light on off-gridders being kicked off their land and being kicked back into the grid. There's nothing that Donald Trump has ever done or ever said to support off-gridders in Costilla County. In fact, he's made statements that we're going to put their homeless into their own little camp area and we're going to have 15-minute cities. That's Donald Trump this year. And so the other
Right.
thing is it's totally hypocritical for pot smoking off-grid Trump supporters to smoke the cannabis when there's nothing about Donald Trump that has promoted at the federal level the legalization of cannabis, which I believe absolutely has to happen. So there's a lot there,
Yep.
but there absolutely is an unseen force, probably a combination of entities working in tandem that are manipulating these world powers, including the heads of Islamic countries themselves, which some Muslims on YouTube, and they're not Muslims that will ever be recommended by the algorithm, but there's one that commented on my channel named Desert Fox, and when I try to look him up on YouTube, he will not come up. But he talks about these violent leaders in these Islamic countries that are not representing the Quran, that are not representing true Muslims, that are involved in killing their own people. And so this is something that a lot of Westerners don't seem to have great knowledge of.
No, why would Westerners know anything about outside of West? Why would they? Because they got everything that they need, and their philosophy can be reduced to everything is random. We're all gonna die. What's the meaning? What's the purpose? And overall, even if that's just sort of for me like a reduction of their argument, I have studied philosophically exactly where this is coming from. And when you're talking about this really important part that I mentioned before, and I always mispronounce this word, is millennialism. The idea in Christianity and in communism and in other political philosophies that the end of the world is coming, and that prepares the unconscious mind to accept so many things that are just unacceptable, and that's why they do it. I just call it the power of nightmares, because really that's what they're conjuring up, our worst nightmare, and then putting it in a theatrical, in a spectacle for us to react and enable the new world order. But let's go back to this idea of entities. And in my show, the Combo Show, and I have to mention it here because I want our network to interconnect, overall, we had mentioned that there's this agency of dark forces. And you mentioned, well, I've taken hallucinogenic mushrooms. Well, let me tell you the story. As you know, that the bankers, they were they were the rock stars before there were rock stars and hippies. Well, they went to Maria Sabinas in Oaxaca, Mexico, I believe, where they were introduced to the Mazapatec, the flesh of the gods. They would call them. Not, I forget what the right proper now what the word is, Teocacatl or something like that. The idea behind that is that Maria Sabinas introduced these agents of Wall Street to the mushroom in order for them to connect to the deeper matrix or the divine. And after a while, there's an actual documentary of what happened to Maria Sabinas after. This is to your point. This is to your point about how we live in this balance, and when you're in the matrix, in the Babylon system, they're taking your energy of your spirit in order to power up the Tower of Babylon, right? Well, when you are not connected to that traditionally and multi-generationally, you have the psychic telepathic power that is innate to all people, not just Browns, not just whatever the heck. Well, these very same aspects, we've known about them. And so from my research, I understood that the very agents of destructions were seeking out a molecule, a key to reality that was going to open them up to the deeper Akashic records that they're seeking out. But they were purposefully trying to find the most anti-human entity that they can seek for it to be reproduced in a silicon-based format. Well, Maria Sabinas in the documentary says, I feel so heartbroken because the mushroom no longer speaks to me. It now speaks in a foreign tongue, which is English. Now, this is a very important phenomenon because it goes to the matrix of reality and how, at the very deep level of unconscious and real sense of being, we're literally imprinting our memory, our identity, our purpose into these holographic forms. Well, now the hallucinogenic mushroom has become a staple of the materialist, reductionist, clinical people who are now, oh, okay, it's okay, guys, you can have mushrooms, but remember, the life has no meaning. We're all gonna die, and literally, this is just so you can help yourself cope with cancer, cope with this other crap. Well, that's where this is going. Well, when I experimented with mushrooms, and I've done it for a long time, and I've done a whole series of it and everything. The whole purpose of it was for me to redefine and activate those DNA memories so that I can really break free and break through. But what I kept noticing as I get deeper and deeper into hallucinogenic trips, whether it's, DMT or mushrooms and acid, and in fact, I have stopped promoting and promulgating people to just go and open up these psychedelic doorways because they themselves don't even know how to walk up a ladder. Why the hell am I going to tell them to get on a rocket ship when they themselves are not even doing the work on a day-to-day life? Well, in my experience, what I've noticed is there's a lot of gray entities, a lot of gray archonic entities that are always observing. They're always on the edge of your perception. They're out there. And there's this story, actually, because I lived in Mexican, well, community, a Mexican American community where a lot of trauma, a lot of conflict, a lot of violence, a lot of poverty. And so during this experimental phase where I was trying to imbue what it meant to be a shaman in some misguided way, well, I was actually at the dawn looking at my next door neighbor's house, and what I noticed was that overall there was this swelling of darkness in the soil, a swelling of darkness in the soil that metamorphosized itself into like actual people. But these people were just shadow people, and they were literally cultivating the pain and the sorrow from the soil as their own sustenance. That's, for me, was a major wake up call. And I've had many times in my experience try to help people through these mediums, through these tools, but I ended up realizing that it just perpetuates and enables their own self hypnosis. So there's a major story there.
Yeah, as far as mushrooms are concerned, yeah, it seems like it's definitely promoted by the algorithm and social media. There's a lot of people apparently that are selling mushroom capsules. It's called microdosing, and a lot of people are on board with this. But I find it interesting that this crackdown in certain parts of the U.S. on cannabis because it's not legal at the federal level, and people are still going to prison for transporting cannabis, which is a much more important medicine, although it can attract some entities if it's used improperly. But it still is medicine and can be used to access higher consciousness. Whereas mushrooms, it seems to be a bigger doorway opener to plant beings and alien beings. And some people believe that aliens brought cannabis and brought certain plants. I know that when I took it in Portland, I said I would tap into that alien energy, and also plants would come alive, but it wasn't necessarily the friendliest thing. It was almost like an intrusion into my mind to where I couldn't wait until the trip was over. So I'm a little suspicious that the government's allowing people to deal mushrooms out in the open and send them back and forth. One person told me, "Hey, Alex, what you need is this mushroom here." And I said, "Isn't that illegal? Doesn't that have to be legalized?" "Oh, people are doing it anyways." Well, okay, people are doing it anyways, but I'm not just going to take a risk and buy some mushrooms from some guy on Instagram. So there's this whole plethora of like mushroom dealers on Instagram, and I would really like to see greater cannabis access wherever we are on the planet than a bunch of mushrooms. I don't have as much knowledge as you have on it, but in my period of stepping back from cannabis, to save money and other reasons. I did also try to do a deep dive on the entity influence over that, and I did come across a
Oh
few
man.
articles and blogs. There aren't very many of them, but I read one from someone that was psychic and said he was psychic and didn't consume cannabis, but he wanted to learn more about the idea of entity attachments. And I can't really paraphrase his story, but it was basically how he talked with the cannabis spirit that said initially it was a spiritual thing, but because of mankind's misuse of the elements and the plant and other things, that it's no longer the same medicine that it used to be. And I will say that when someone does consume cannabis, that it's best that it's from a dispensary, that it's not used, that it's not full of chemicals. That if you buy cannabis from someone that has negative energies around them, that consciously channels demons or manipulates people through YouTube, like one individual who I met in Colorado years ago, it can be a very negative experience and might even link someone psychically up with their drug dealer. And that might be a very negative thing to ever buy cannabis from people that have ill intention. And that's also the problem with cannabis being illegal, is that people might be forced to buy cannabis from people that are criminals. They have demonic attachments that might also dabble in meth. And so I actually have had some bad experiences buying cannabis from people that were on the neo-Nazi side, methamphetamine side. And most of us know that people that use methamphetamines open up the doorway or open up doorways to demonic interferences. And that's a much longer conversation. But I will say this, I did say that I dabbled with heroin in the past. And the only reason that I was able to overcome that, where a lot of people don't, and continue going on to prisons, institutions, and death, as they say, is I found the will to live by creating my alternative media platform. And so when I embarked on the healing aspect of speaking, and I guess you can even call it shamanism, by speaking of these truths in the unseen realms in a digital format, i.e. a digital shamanism with the internet, that obsession to use was lifted. And in previous years, briefly, okay, I did take a medication to cope with the withdrawal of cannabis. And that was a mistake and it damaged my liver. Again, the motivation was not schizophrenia, which I do not have. It was to deal with the withdrawal symptoms of cannabis that did not go away even a full year later. And that's not a good sign for someone to not overcome cannabis usage. That's a sign maybe of some deeper problems. And so when I stopped taking that poisonous medication and I got back into making podcasts, even though I wasn't recording and uploading those podcasts, I was just writing and creating podcasts for my computer. Everything began to change after that, and there was massive healing. So I would say that speaking one's truth in today's society is definitely undervalued, and it's definitely overvalued in today's society to just jump on board repeating other people's conspiracy talking points and pushing far left talking points and far right talking points. I believe that people should be taught how to access their own truth. And in future recordings and writings, I'd like to talk about what it means to be a conscious parent, because there's a lot of human beings that are procreating children in today's day and age that aren't really thinking about what it really takes to prepare their child for the challenges that their child is going to face. So that includes my own father. He wants to act like he's concerned about concentration camps in the future if Donald Trump comes back into power, or at least that's what he said in 2016. Yet he is going to show his family on Facebook. He is going to post all of his thoughts on Facebook when Facebook itself has been involved in genocides in Myanmar, also known as Burma, in arming, in helping radicalize the Hindu extremists in India. And so it's really naive for these people to be concerned about their own people, but to come into the Americold, as we just said, and to trust living in America's largest cities, to trust Facebook, to trust the U.S. military. Yeah, there's a lot of trauma that's still ongoing with a lot of these formerly indigenous people that have now been indoctrinated into the American cult.
And it continues to be that way because it needs new blood. It needs new sacrifice. And yeah, you're right. The big mega cities are becoming just like a net to capture all these souls. And I've been traveling quite a bit from Texas, South Texas, all the way to New York, and from New York to Tennessee, and so on and so forth. The major impact of ESG, the global reset, and everything, people don't even notice it. It's being literally bootstrapped from the ground up, and there's all the standardization. Everything is for pedestrians, so you can come in here, walk here, shop there, and it's all talk of the town. Meanwhile, on the outskirts, you'll have the homelessness, you'll have the crime, you'll have the indigent, you have people just being pushed and pushed and pushed away. But it's these very same people that are pushing away that they sucked dry and now are being displaced and disposed. Yeah, unfortunately, when you read into, and we're talking about the subtleties of psychedelics, energy, and overall the matrix of control, I mean, all these generations, they died away in dramatic ways. Of course, there's going to be an energetic echo, a resonance, a whole invisible veil that is just piercing through. Well, when we think about taking any substance, it lowers our spiritual immunity. There, secret teachings of all ages, Menly P. Hall talks about even the karmic load of narcotics like cocaine or heroin, hashish. And if we think about what cannabis was and what it is today, well, it goes against to the spectrum of material reductionism. People want to take THC, Delta 9, and then like bomb it out, like synthesize it, like concentrate it. And that is exactly what is the divorce and disconnect between the medicine, the full spectrum benefit of the plant. Now, I take mushrooms, like the issue of mushrooms personally, because it originates from my people. We've had a lot of fucking practice with that. And the one thing about it is we never use mushrooms to communicate with God. That's foolish. We already know God is real. We talk and feel into that Godhead in many different ways. Even our idea of time is completely different. So when we're dealing with hallucinogenic mushrooms in the West today, well, we're no longer dealing with the traditions of the past. We're dealing with the perspective of today, the modern age, the postmodern existence. It's freaking nothingness. It's all meaningless. We're all gonna just party for today. And that's literally what happens. I've had people who've tried to help themselves with mushrooms, and they'll do so well for 2 or 3 years, maybe a year, but then they will relapse because the underlying fundamental problem hasn't been resolved. And in order to actually resolve a lot of these things, we have to have the consciousness of our heart intact. And in order to do that, you're going to have to feel your pain. Most of the people who are psychonauts tend to obfuscate their own pain because they're caught in their own matrix of carnival. The carnival is an amazing spectacle, but one thing I feel that we're getting really close to saying and like connecting this dot is really most of the stuff we can turn off because we can stop thinking about it. But when we stop thinking about it, we're feeling, and we don't want to feel. Why don't we want to feel? Because it creates this moment that is eternal. I know that you had mentioned yet sometime before this, in the middle of this conversation, about the idea of like collective ascension, and I want to be very specific, very particular about this. No, I agree with you. I agree with you. There's no such thing as this phenomena where we're all standardized into our pathway to heaven. No, there's the idea of transcendental time that exists throughout. You call it Akashic records or whatever, but individuals can connect to that transcendental time. And when they're having this experience of being, it's almost in a sense, in a real sense, an eternal, non-localized existence. And we get to choose where we are going to flip the channel to. Once we understand that frequency through feeling, we can really just fast forward through all this other BS. Man, I can't explain to you the morbidity that I see in middle of the road America. There's so many people who are tired and done with being miserable. And that's a cusp that not a lot of people are actually paying attention because they're focused on the political side. But a lot of my travels are showing me this. People are divorcing. I mean, of course, divorce rates are going off the freaking roof. But we're talking about the people who've been in on a relationship for 20, 10, maybe even 30 years. And they just say, you know what? I no longer choose to live this life and I choose to begin anew. And for the outsider, they would say, well, you wasted 20, 30 years of your life. Now you're trying to make it up. No, no. Reality does not work that way. What we think about time is not the same as you and I think about time. Time is the language of God. So when we are actually making that choice today, no matter the 20 years, 200 years, 3,000 years, we're literally accessing the eternity, the eternal essence of our being. And we can say, you know what? I'm no longer consenting. I don't want to be miserable. And I don't care. This world is limitless and I'm ready to live life. That's the message I want people to like really carry away today.
Yeah, not everybody is meant to be owned by their mate, although it is good to have a union. And so
Hmm.
some people are breaking out of that paradigm. But what you're saying also is that wherever you go, there's this great sadness, unconsciousness, fear of death, fear of the end of the world. And social media has played a role in it, but it's not just social media, it's also the true nature of consciousness today. And I've seen this in Portland, Oregon. That's why I left. I saw this in rural Colorado where I had my own land and I left there because there was no consciousness there, even all the churches that I visited. And in that area of Pagosa Springs, there's also a fair amount of doomsday cults and YouTubers that are on the dark side, as opposed to people telling the truth. With with these substances, I will say that the other sad thing about cannabis being illegal at the federal level is that it doesn't recognize that some people have a genetic disposition to have a deeper spiritual experience because their ancestors used it, whether they be East Indian or Middle Eastern, and I have a combination of that. Whereas if you look at some of the Anglo-Saxon bloodlines, many of them might describe having psychosis or mental health problems smoking cannabis. So when I come across in my travels using cannabis, it affects me in a very, very different way than it tends to affect others, which is unfortunate that modern medicine doesn't recognize that it actually is a sacred medicine that is helpful, but you need to use it in the right way. Yeah. The other thing, okay, sacrifice. With the solar flares, it does seem like the world powers, the entities, whoever, whatever they are, they know how we're affected by these things. And the prana that is emitted from human beings when the solar flares hit. And so not only do we see an increase in sex, which is more fertility, we also see
Hmm.
an increase in sacrifice energy through the wars. So as we see the aurora borealis come in certain areas, although I've never witnessed it myself, I've just seen it, in pictures. It's in Norway and Finland, and sometimes it crosses down into parts of Colorado, but it doesn't really get too far south. It stays up in the far, far northern Canadian areas mostly. But I heard from a Lakota man on Twitter say that his ancestors, Native American tribes, they believe that those were the new souls waiting to incarnate. So I connected the dots at least a decade ago that when we see an increase in solar flares in the peak of it, we have an increased amount of people having sex and having babies, and we also see an increase in wars and people getting killed. So we see an increase of souls entering into the planet and an increase in souls exiting the planet. And then if you go over and watch the Vietnamese woman by the name of Julie Epperly, she talks about this obsession with fertility and really it being a product of the Nephilim or the giants, this obsession with having more and more kids. And we just talked about how a lot of people having kids aren't doing jack squat to prepare the kids for their later adult years. My parents sabotaged my life. They won't admit it, but they did not prepare me for the challenges that I would experience later on. In fact, they traumatized me early on before the world got a chance to do that, and they still will not become conscious enough to acknowledge that. And so this trauma program is being duplicated. And who does it really benefit? It benefits obviously these entities that want a large population of traumatized individuals that can be led into race wars and other things. And so, a large population is not necessarily the best thing. And that's again another lie of the conspiracy movement, constantly obsessing on being critical of anyone that says that our world is overpopulated. In fact, in many places in this world, it is overpopulated. Now, being aware of that is not the same thing as saying that we then worship the Georgia Guidestones. but they act like that's what people are doing. Well, aren't you saying then you want depopulation? So yeah, we are definitely very, very overpopulated in some regions of the US. And some people say, like Tex Mars, well, in the state of Texas, where he's from, he passed in recent years, you could fit all the world's humans into Texas. Look at the big cities in Texas now and Oregon. Who would want to be sandwiched all the world's population into Texas? That sounds crazy. So, yeah, what we really need in reality is to be living in harmony with nature, not in major cities. And in an ideal world, we would have a mindful off grid movement to where people of all religions, all races, all ethnic groups would be leaving the big cities and returning to the ways of our ancestors. But that's not going to happen, in my opinion, unless we're forced to return to the old ways. And the only way that's going to happen so far is if we have a solar event that takes us there. And although there's going to be chaos, there's going to be cannibalism, unfortunately, in some of these concrete jungles. That's the only thing that I see that will ever lead us in that direction. Because as long as we have this grid and the current food stamp system and the current welfare system, people will fight to the death to defend that system.
Of course, they have a vested stake if they feel like they're dependent completely, and that's why the UN population replacement is bringing in completely state-dependent people who will fight to the death for their goodies. Alex, I truly enjoyed our
Yep.
conversation. We can go on for 8 more hours. I'm telling you, we can. And so I want for us to possibly consider, I understand we're two different people in two different places connected through the internet. So in my opinion, whenever I like to work with someone, I really want for them to be a true, authentic individual in my life. And I look forward to collaborating with you and doing more work on this and many other aspects of the conversations that we just had. Because overall, dude, I don't think many people are paying attention to this. And those who are actually speaking on this are betraying the whole truth because they have a vested interest, like we said. Well, I can self-censor as long as I get popular. And I've seen you. I've seen you for a while. I understand you're not those types of people. I myself have put myself in a lot of difficult situations, but I've never ever sell out to anyone for anything. So, man, thank you so much for having this conversation with me.
Thank you. Yeah, we'll talk again. Yeah, you can advise me later on the sidelines on Facebook how to maybe take my Substack RSS feed and put it on Spotify without spending too many hours uploading individual files. I'd like to learn about that.
Yes, man, I'm working it out too. What I'm doing is first setting my digital environment and my workflow and scheduling my content and making sure that these platforms are interconnected. So let's do something. Let's put something in the books. I'll message you and let's make a date out of that.
Yeah, it was.
A date.
I haven't talked to anybody in about 4 years as far as interview wise. So today was great. Yeah.
Awesome, man. I'm glad to hear it, man. I'm sending you my love and I'm sending you good vibes your way.
All right. God bless. Thank you.
Have a great day. Bye bye.
You too. Bye bye.